Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
BTW FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an adjustable implant, 68 milligrams radio pain. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Canada Did What? A podcast from Post Media. Uncover the untold stories of the Canadian history you might think you remember with me, Tristan Hopper. From one prime minister's crazy camaraderie with communists to the war over metric conversion and the harrowing reality of the October crisis. Subscribe now to Canada Did What? Wherever you get your podcasts.
I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Prime Minister.
Well, it's official. We have a new government in Canada, and soon we will get the election that many people have been demanding for far too long, except the outcome may not be what those people wanted. Hello, welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host, and today we're talking about Mark Carney. He's just been sworn in as Canada's 24th Prime Minister. We are looking at heading to the polls in less than 2 weeks, and voters will be voting on a wide range of issues, or perhaps just Donald Trump. To talk about all of this, I turned to two of the great minds in the post-media universe to get some thoughts on this, both columnists with great experience in dissecting what is happening in the political sphere. This is our conversation with John Ivison from National Post and Lorne Gunter from The Sun. Well, gents, what's your verdict on the Carney government? I mean, they haven't done much yet, have they? John?
Early days, as you say. But he's making the right noises.
I'd say a change in tone, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, noticeable. And as the ministers came in, he didn't get head-to-head rubbing. Remember that famous picture of Justin and Jody Wilson-Raybould? Not the time that he demoted her, but the first time he appointed her as Justice Minister. And there's that kind of image of, they were both weeping, and there was none of that. I mean, Carney's not touchy-feely in the same way that Trudeau is, so it was a firm handshake or a air kiss.
Lorne, what are your thoughts on his tone from the swearing in and, that first press conference?
Well, the tone is different, but I don't see how this group of ministers is going to be all that much different when it comes to policy on the ground than the group they replaced. I like the fact that there are only 24 ministers instead of 34 ministers. I think that the federal government, most governments, provincial governments too, have grown far too large over the last few years, and that's so you're satisfying regional and gender and all sorts of other constituencies, but I think 24 is good. There are 2 ministers, if I read the list correctly, 2 ministers from west of Ontario.
Is a very Toronto GTA heavy list.
It is. And Carney has appointed himself the minister responsible for Alberta and the North. He hasn't lived here since the early 80s. I cannot imagine a prime minister appointing himself the minister for Quebec had he never lived there or hadn't lived there for the last 40 years. So there's a lot of stuff that bothers me about this. But you and John are right. The tone was better. There wasn't that, I don't know, Trudeau just had that sort of wishy-washy, smarmy kind of way of touchy-feely talking, and Carney doesn't have that.
Now, I'll say this. I thought he did well with his questions that were put to him. They weren't softball, but it wasn't an aggressive encounter with the gallery. They had serious questions to ask. They asked serious questions, but they were all questions he would have expected. When will you meet with President Trump? Why are you going to Europe? Things like that. But I thought his answers did okay. If he hadn't gone, I had been asked about this on radio prior to the swearing in. I said, well, what if the host said, what if he doesn't answer questions from the media? I said, then his next encounter is going to be a very grumpy one with a gallery that already feels like he hasn't been paying them much attention. John, this new iteration of Mark Carney was trying to explain to people the National Press Gallery that covers a politician is very different than the people that show up to cover a bank governor's news conference. The interactions are very different. Do you want to take a run at that? Because you've done, like me, you've done both, where you're in there and all the financial reporters are like, headwinds, blah, blah. And they just write down all this jargon that the rest of us don't understand. And they have a nice back and forth, as opposed to with a prime minister at times, you can be hammer and tong between the two. Yeah,
much more genteel on the financial side. I've done both. I covered finance for 12 years. Yeah, I think he's going to have to get used to that. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that he didn't hold regular press conferences during the leadership. It was clear he was the front runner, and if you're the front runner, why would you invite the prospect of falling flat in your face? So, and I do think that the big unanswered question still remains this move by Brookfield south from Toronto, which he almost disowned, even though he was the chair and clearly recommended it. He doesn't. He had
nothing to do with it other than voting for it and asking shareholders.
Recommending it to all shareholders.
Yes.
Yeah. So that doesn't surprise me. The fact he's now taken them, even you kind of have to. Do I think he'll do okay? I do. He was the Bank of Canada governor, Bank of England governor during Brexit, and I've also worked in the UK. And the tabloids, particularly the tabloids that were pro-Brexit, are merciless in a way that the Parliamentary Press Gallery is not. And he had to weather that. He was the kind of most hated man in England for a little while when he had come out against Brexit. So he's got some sense of what's in store for him.
Lorne, the decision to go to Europe instead of going to Washington first, I think that's a mistake. I know that there are hazards in going down and meeting with Donald Trump. You never know what he's going to say, but you have to meet with him and deal with him at some point. To me, it looks like Carney's going to Europe to collect allies for his rebel alliance in his fight with Darth Vader. He needs a Han Solo to go with his Luke Skywalker. Macron and Starmer have already been to the White House, bent the knee, and had very good meetings. In fact, Starmer was asked to stick up for Canada at the White House and refused. So I'm not sure what he's trying to do.
Yeah. You know what? I don't think there's any harm in him talking to other leaders first before he goes to meet Trump. But you can do that on video conferences. You can pick up the phone. There's all sorts of ways. I think it's smart of him to talk to Macron. I think it's smart of him to talk to Starmer, if Starmer will talk to him.
I believe he's had an invite already.
Yeah, okay. So here you go. Let's talk to these guys who have some experience with Trump and who are politicians. Because Carney is not yet fully a politician. And so talk to them and then go see Trump. But to have a showy trip to Europe, and I sort of kidded there a minute ago that he's going to renew his passports because he has 2 European ones.
Speaking as a European, as he once famously said, that line will come back to haunt him.
Oh, I know that the ads have already been drawn up. But yeah, I think it's okay to talk to these people before you go see Trump. But in the middle of this trade war, which is fixating everyone in the country, and rightly so, you maybe should go see Trump first.
Can I disagree with that?
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Trudeau went down to see Trump in Mar-a-Lago before January 21st. And I thought it was a smart move at the time. It seemed to be a way to get in and get to know them, and LeBlanc was there and so on. But it was at that meeting, if you remember, that they resurrected the 51st state line, which had never been mentioned in the whole election campaign, the US election campaign. And when it was Trudeau's response that Canada would be devastated if Trump put on tariffs, that I think fired his imagination that this could be something that could happen. That he could pressure.
Do you think that that's what actually happened?
Yeah, I do. I do.
That was because I've only heard that from the American side. I could see that being the answer. That would be a horrible answer for a Canadian Prime Minister to give.
Right. I mean, he basically should have kept his mouth shut. So, I think the 51st state thing was mentioned in the first Trump administration, but only as a joke. But I think what sparked it was Trudeau saying we'd be screwed if you did this.
Well, what's the old line? Many a true thing is said in jest.
Right.
I think this started off as a joke. Trudeau lost his freaking mind, and Trump is a bully. So he sees that there's a weakness there. He pokes and he pokes and he pokes and he pokes. And he kind of does it as sort of a blowhard 19th hole, old-timey kind of golfer kind of thing. And he does it partly because he's a bully. And it has grown into a real thing. When Trudeau said it was a real thing back at that Canada-US summit thing he had in Toronto, I think he was right. I think it has grown with Trump into a real thing. But it started off as a joke 3 months ago, and Trump has let it morph.
But my point was that do we really want Carney to walk into the same environment where to me, he demand some respect, hold out, and there are already signs in the US that the internal pressures are going to sort this thing out. There was a good tweet this morning from Fox Business correspondent Charles Gasparini, and he said there's a lot of talk in Trump circles about the need for a grand plan to resolve this tariff dispute with Mexico, Canada, and Europe. Some kind of deal that would, a universal settlement that would act as a compromise and really as a face-saving measure for Trump. I think at the moment, the pressures will come from down south, and we need to be able to be flexible to give him that face-saving opportunity where he can just say, oh, it was all a joke.
And I think that is part of what the meeting between Doug Ford, Howard Lutnick, and the two federal ministers, François-Philippe Champagne and Dominic LeBlanc, was about. They were offering him an off-ramp, and perhaps they got that meeting because of Ford escalating it, which I'm always careful. You've got to be careful about when you escalate, when you don't. But clearly they caught the attention of like, wait a minute, this is spiraling out of control. The stock market's tanking. These guys are going to put the $100 a month on people's power bills extra. We got to haul them down here. And sure, there's some smack talk, but I think they gave him the off-ramp there.
If you look at the stock market indices, the three major indices in the United States, for the first 50 days of every president's term since George Bush won in 2000, there's only one time that the stock market has done as badly as it has done under Trump, and that was Obama. And Obama came to power during the financial crisis. That wasn't stuff he did.
Yeah.
It was already in motion when Obama got sworn in, and it just kept going down for the first 3 months. Trump has done all of this on his own. He could have avoided every single percentage point lost off of the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, if he had simply not started this irrational, unprovoked war. But he has got it in his head now that everyone outside of the United States has stolen everything from the United States.
He was sitting with the Irish Prime Minister the other day, celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and they said, "Is Ireland ripping you off?" Yeah, they're ripping us off. Have a cookie.
I've got the numbers for what Lawrence just mentioned. S&P down 8.18% in the past month. The Dow Jones down 7.19%. The S&P TSX is only down 3.72%.
The NASDAQ is down close to 12 last time I looked.
It is.
Yeah,
12%.
it's the pain is being felt not in Toronto but in New York.
Exactly.
So to get back to when Mark Carney should go visit him, does he visit him before or after calling an election? Because I think we're all hearing the same thing. Election call by March 23rd, voting the end of April or first week of May.
Yeah. Well, I think he doesn't go down and he has the election. And when he goes down with a mandate, when the internal pressures have forced Trump to stop talking all this crap.
Lorne?
Yeah, I don't see how he can go down during an election. He has to call an election soon, or he has to face Parliament, which he can't do because he's not an MP. But you know what I mean. There's going to be opposition. They're going to be assembled. They're going to be asking questions. The gallery will all be there, and there'll be a kind of scrutiny he's not probably used to yet. So I think he calls the election within the next 10 days. We're the 24th is when they're supposed to come back. Today's the 14th. So within the next 10 days, I think we're into an election. The writs get dropped and away we go. And I don't think once he's done that he can go down and see Trump. But who knows?
I mean, Doug Ford did in the middle of an election campaign, different circumstances. He already had a mandate and was seeking another mandate early. It worked for him. Do the Liberals just copy and paste Doug Ford's Ontario election campaign strategy into their own binder and say, here's what we're going to do? We need a mandate to deal with Donald Trump?
Well, I think all they'll talk about, if he's smart, I mean, Carney, if he starts talking about clean energy or the military, his military plan, it sucks. It needs to be updated and everything moving a lot faster. But if he talks about Trump all the time, I mean, I think the Conservatives have been caught on the back foot. They're talking about, they've got a 2024 campaign that's basically about the carbon tax and about Trudeau, and things have moved on. We're in 2025, and when people are polled about Trump and who's more likely to roll over to Trump between Poilievre and Carney wins every time.
Well, he wasn't recently in Leger poll that they did for us at Post Media, but the most recent Abacus data won. And Abacus released this on Friday. Their vote intention numbers are 38% for the Conservatives, 34% for the Liberals, NDP down at 15%. And when you look at who's moving over, it's Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario. So ahead in Quebec, pretty much tied in Atlantic Canada and Ontario with the Conservatives, and then the Liberals losing everything west. We'll get to your grumpy self about that in a few minutes, Lorne. But it's also older voters, boomers, are moving over in larger numbers to
people
to
are
the Liberals.
nostalgic for the economic nationalism of his daddy.
But on who is best? They asked who's best to deal with Trump. 42% said Mark Carney and the Liberals, to 28% Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. And then on every other issue except climate change, the Conservatives are in the lead. Even on healthcare, it's 30% for the Conservatives, 29% for the Liberals. But on housing, cost of living, immigration, crime, security and employment, the Conservatives have a decent lead on every issue.
But none of that matters. I don't think any of that matters. I think we've gone from the politics of anger to the politics of reassurance. People want to be reassured that somebody who knows how these great machines of trade and commerce work is in charge. And I don't think that Poilievre, he may, if they can get Carney's negatives up, then it's a whole new ballgame. But at the moment, the trajectory is all in favor of Carney.
How does it feel to be a Westerner right now and looking at this happening, Eastern Canada changing its mind again, Lorne?
We were absolutely convinced that we were going to be done with those damn Liberals. And it looks like Trump is going to have saddled us with them again. And I don't think there'll be an immediate national unity problem. But look who's basically the second in command in the cabinet now. It's Stephen Guilbeault. He's no longer the environment minister, but he's the Quebec lieutenant. He's in charge of heritage. He's going to do for free speech what he tried to do to the oil and gas industry. He's going to pump up the CBC. We're going to get after the election all those issues that you talked about.
If if they win, always remember, voters are fickle, polls can change, campaigns matter.
Yeah. And I think Tristan Hopper, a couple months back, had a very good piece about Kim Campbell and John Turner, who took over from unpopular prime ministers, immediately got big bumps in their popularity. They were Kim Campbell was polling as high as any leader had polled for the previous 20 years, and yet she got wiped out. Her party ended up with 2 seats in the election 4 months later. The Liberals aren't stupid. They've seen this. They saw it with Turner. They've seen it with Campbell, and they know if they even wait a couple of months and make Carney govern, that they run the risk that he will pan out as a dud too, and he will lose big time. So they're going right in. They're going, while the Trump stuff is hot. Like I don't fault them for their strategy, but I never have liked Donald Trump. In the last month, I've started to hate Donald Trump. And if he foists a Liberal government on us again, I will really hate the man.
Let me ask you about something that's specific to Western Canada, because if I don't, I'm sure I'll get nasty emails. Hearing a lot of frustration. Premier Scott Moe, former Premier Brad Wall, both out of Saskatchewan, saying, why is nobody talking about the Chinese tariffs, and why is there no national unity crisis about that? I mean, I might say China's not threatening to take us over, but they are trying to take us over. But, I mean, what do you do about those tariffs? 100% on canola, on peas. Devastating for farmers. Hopefully they can find other markets for their product. But, I mean, those tariffs came from China as retaliation for our tariffs on Chinese goods. And if we didn't tariff those Chinese goods, the Biden administration was threatening us, never mind Donald Trump.
Yeah, and if you thought Justin Trudeau was cozy with the Chinese, just wait till you see Mark Carney. Mark Carney has spent much of the last, at least the last 10 years, probably closer to 20, making overtures to China, being pointed to Chinese boards. I think he might be able to do something about that because he's too cozy with the Chinese. But yeah, these are issues that bother people in the West and are completely ignored in Ottawa. I'm not sure that there's any good way of doing it. I used to be a Triple E Senate advocate. You know, we had to have equal and elected senates, and that was going to change. I don't think that would really do too much either. Over time, it might, but you know, these are just issues that we are always going to have to be disappointed on in the West, because look what's happened.
So I knew China was going to retaliate, and I'd like both of you on this. I thought that they would have said, "Oh well, the Liberal government in Canada relies a lot on Quebec. Hit them with tariffs on pork, because a lot of the pork production comes out of Quebec." They went with Western products that are specific to Western Canada. Is this an attempt to foster, separatist sentiment or trigger national unity crisis?
I think they need Quebec's pork more than they need Saskatchewan's canola. I mean, I just think it's that simple.
John?
You know, every morning I get an email from a guy I've developed a relationship with, the farmer in Alberta. He's telling me that canola markets are up $4 a ton this morning, but $73 down, or 11% since Monday. I mean, you can imagine that causes massive resentment. I mean, the government in Ottawa can say to itself, "Well, it's utilitarianism. We're doing the most good for the most number of people by trying to save jobs in the car market." But yeah, I mean,
there's a lot of people work in agriculture across the prairies.
Agriculture, and it clearly. One thing led directly to another, and the government did it in the full knowledge that this was likely to happen. So, yeah, I can fully appreciate and sympathize with people who are resentful about that.
All right, we'll take a quick break here, and when we come back, I want to talk about the pending election and where each of you think things are going. More in moments.
Are you a forward thinker? Then you need an HR and finance platform that thinks like you do. Workday is the AI platform that helps propel your organization, your workforce, and your industry into the future. Workday, moving business forever forward.
Hey, what's up? It's Wanda Sykes. I'm here to remind you about something super important, getting your breast screened. Because trust me, your breast health should be a priority. Early detection for breast cancer can change the game, which is why you should visit yourattentionplease.com to learn more. And do me a favor, if you've already had a breast cancer screening, remind your friends and family to visit yourattentionplease.com too. We gotta look out for our girls.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
So as we head into the election, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the background, and that one being Mark Carney flew to Toronto the other day, just after being selected as Liberal leader, and he had breakfast with Doug Ford. And both he and Ford made sure that there were photos and video released of this encounter, that people saw that they were getting along together. Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre, I can't say they have a bad relationship because they have no relationship. And I had a lot of people reach out and say, is Doug Ford endorsing Mark Carney? Now, officially, they will tell you no. Oh, no, that's not happening. But to start off the election campaign with a guy who just won a third mandate, who's pretty popular in the most populous province and who should be on the blue team with Pierre Poilievre, that's bad news for Pierre.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not only that the two leaders don't connect, but I know their teams are not fond of each other. So, yeah, that's a kind of strange one. But I mean, you would expect the incoming Prime Minister and the Premier of the biggest province to be on the same page on this particular issue. You need them to be, and I think Ford's been terrific. I think when he went down to Washington and made his speech there, talking about, let's draw the borders around the continent, not merging countries, but become even firmer allies. I think he hit all the right notes in all the right places. I mean, the number of times he's been on Fox TV, he speaks Republican.
Yeah.
And he's been a great asset to Canada, I think. So no great surprise that anybody coming in would say, well, let's utilize this guy because he's probably our best weapon.
But I'm not sure that Pierre Poilievre and Doug Ford have even had a phone call together. I'm not sure that they've talked to each other. And when Ford won his re-election, Michael Barrett, Eastern Ontario MP, quite like Michael, great guy, but he was asked in a scrum or a news conference on Parliament Hill, you guys haven't said congratulations to Ford's team, have you? Why not? And he couldn't even bear himself then to say, well, congratulations to them. There's that much of an animosity. The two campaign managers, Jenny Byrne in Poilievre's case and Corey Tenike in Ford's case, they're actually very good friends. But it's just everything else. It's like oil and water. Does this hurt Pierre, Lorne?
Yeah, for sure it does. I mean, I think Doug Ford meeting with Mark Carney was an awful lot like, you remember in the 2012 election, Hurricane Sandy blew through New York and New Jersey.
Yeah.
And the governor of New Jersey, who was a big-time Republican,
Chris
Christie, yep.
Met with Obama on the shore while they're talking about federal aid to rebuild and things. And it was seen as a tacit endorsement. I don't think it was, but it turned Obama's polls around. Obama did not have great polling numbers going into his second election. And Christie's endorsement seemed to turn that around. I think Doug Ford has done the same thing for Mark Carney. He's made it acceptable to people who vote for him in Ontario. And that's a broad cross-section because he's not a particularly conservative. He's made it acceptable for people who vote for Doug Ford to think also about voting for Mark Carney. And that you add to that the fact that Pierre Poilievre's strategy was to wait quietly in the weeds for the Liberals to self-destruct, and then he would come out big time in the campaign this fall and collect on all that. That was a good strategy when Justin Trudeau was the leader of the Liberals. But as soon as Trudeau goes, and now that Trump has thrown in the trade war, that has become a bad strategy because nobody knows Poilievre. They don't know what he stands for. When the Liberals or the Protecting Canada ad people say he's just a Trump clone here in Canada, most people don't have anything to say. No, he's not. So he gets tarred with Trump at a time when Trump is as hated as he's ever been in Canada. And so I think Ford was giving a tacit endorsement to Carney.
I don't think people really get the importance of these tacit endorsements. And I remember when whichever campaign was it, 2019 or 2021, because Trudeau was kind of behind in both. But then Obama came out. Was it 2021?
Oh, in both, I believe. Obama,
but there was one where Obama came out, and it was a tacit endorsement, or it was an explicit endorsement for progressives to forgive Trudeau. I think it was 2019 because it was blackface.
2019.
Yeah, and so I remember when the thing came out, and the Trudeau folks were delighted. I was on the bus at the time, and they were just delighted because it was like a sort of thumbs up to progressive voters that they could go back to Trudeau, and they did. And this, Ontario voters don't need a lot of encouragement to elect a Conservative at Queen's Park and a Liberal in Ottawa. I mean, all through the Harper years, McGuinty was in power, or the Liberals were in power in Queen's Park. It seems to be the accepted way of doing things. So that is not nothing.
I think federally we are headed for the equivalent of Ontario's McGuinty Wynne election. The transition there. Wynne should never have won. She was unpopular. The McGuinty government was unpopular, and they should have been wiped out.
So Lorne, just on that, the history of those transitions is not great. You look at Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. You look at Chrétien and Martin, and as you say, McGuinty and Wynne. But the difference is, Carney was not part of that government, and I know they keep trying to say that he was an advisor to Trudeau. He was a very, very arm's length advisor. He was very busy moving his Brookfield headquarters from Toronto to New York at the time. So he was not
and making money
involved.
Making money off toll roads in Lima.
Right. So it's kind of a different beast, I think, than
it is, but it was one where the Conservatives thought they were going to win. They were sure they were going to win, and in the end they got beaten by Wynne. And that flummoxed them. I mean, they didn't know what to do. And I think that we are headed for perhaps the same side. When you look at the polls, the Conservatives are still slightly ahead most places. And in the big number places, I think it's head to head. But this, like when you talked, Brian talked earlier about the Abacus poll that showed Carney is way ahead of Poilievre on who would you like to deal with Trump. And then on every other issue, the Conservatives are ahead of the Liberals. They're going to come to power. If they come to power again, the Liberals are going to come to power. Trump is going to have to back off because the oil industry in the States is against them. The agriculture industry is now getting to be against them, except for the dairy industry. The stock market is nuts against him, and it is purely his fault. And he'll have to back off. We'll get the trade thing settled. And then you get 4 years of Trudeau redo with Carney, who is crazy on his policies are insane on crime. His policies are nuts on budget.
He brought in David Lametti as an advisor.
Yeah.
David Lametti's the man that brought in C5, which got rid of mandatory minimum sentences for second and third convictions on gun smuggling. And I remember the news conference where he announced it. He portrayed it all as, well, this is to help young men who might have a youthful indiscretion. No, by the time you've been convicted a third time for smuggling guns across the Canada-U.S. border, that's not a mistake. You're a criminal. But that, I could see that coming a mile away, because when Lametti first ran, I started reading his academic profile. And this is right. He was a law professor at McGill. This is right within where he would be. If Trump backs off soon, though, we're talking April 28th for the election, or May 5th. My understanding is it may go to May 5th because they don't have a lot of candidates right now, the Liberals. The Conservatives and NDP are ahead of them in nominating candidates, so they may need an extra week to have everyone in the game. If in that time the Trump issue is mostly settled and we're headed towards another NAFTA renegotiation, does that change this equation? I mean, Trump is the only thing that has changed since Trudeau left. Trump is the only issue. So if he dissipates, what does that do to the campaign?
I think you hit the nail on the head. That would completely transform it. I think the trajectory at the moment, I can only see one outcome if things stay the way they are. But yeah, I mean, as you point out,
if he keeps poking the bear, I think it helps the Liberals win.
Well, I don't think he's been poking the bear, to be fair to him, though. I mean, I could see why it might be in his interest to do so, but I think that's just too dangerous.
No, if he keeps up on tariff threats and talking about 51st state, which he's been doing,
sure,
that
helps. I thought you meant Carney.
No.
Yes,
I mean,
if Trump keeps poking the bear, we're going to have a Liberal majority.
Yeah, which I when I was down in Washington interviewing Steve Bannon, I told him that, and he said, "Yeah, that could happen." I've told the Breitbart guys that, all kinds of them, and I think that's part of why you're seeing Ben Shapiro, a major conservative commentator in the state, say, "Hey, hold on a minute here. Maybe we want to rethink what's going on."
Well, do they really care who's prime minister up here? I don't think they care that much.
Some of them do.
I don't think that. I was surprised how deeply the trade issue had pierced American voters' awareness. Because, of course, we're all aware of it, absolutely. But I wasn't sure that Americans were. But I spent 4 days in the States last week, and people didn't know who I was or why I was there. But as soon as they found out that I was a Canadian, they would say, "Oh, God, I'm so sorry we're doing this to you guys." And I was surprised by the level of understanding they had about what Trump was doing. And they apologized for the president, and then we moved on to other topics. But they know.
I think it's not just the knowledge that they are the ones who are going to pay the tariffs. So it's not just a self-interested economic thing. There is a sense of an acknowledgement of Canada's relationship with the US and 9/11, World War I, II, Korea, Afghanistan. And there was a great clip, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a gentleman in North Carolina at a Meet the Candidate, or a Meet the Representative meeting, where he asked him yes or no about Canada. And it was just the whole crowd that were there were disgusted with what is happening to Canada. And I don't think it was an economic issue. I think it's a sense of a fairness issue. They think it's being unfair to their closest ally.
Okay, so Trump is the number one issue. Would you be able to turn that around? John, earlier you mentioned getting negatives up on Carney. The Conservatives, speaking to them the other day, they said they've got the biggest ad buy in Canadian political history going right now. In fact,
they better get it out the door pretty quick.
They said it's already out the door. And I've seen the ads on TV. I'm just on social media to post things, so I don't necessarily see the ads. But my understanding is they're all over social media. They're on digital platforms like all of the post-media newspapers. They're, if you're playing Xbox, you're going to see an ad if you meet the right demographic. Can they actually turn this into being about Mark Carney saying he's just like Justin.
Yeah, I think they can. I mean, especially if the heat is turned down on Trump, or if Trump turns the heat down. I did see an Abacus poll which suggested that Carney's negatives are rising. He's still in plus territory, as in more people like him than don't like him.
Yeah, I saw that graph, and it showed both the negatives and the positives going up on a similar trajectory because nobody knew who he was.
No,
It's true.
to some extent, he's benefited from the fact that everyone can project onto him, because he's a blank slate. Everyone can project onto him what they're hoping for in a leader at the moment. And to be frank, Pierre Poilievre has never warmed people. He is not a warm kind of guy. And I would say that his team's desire to have alliteration on everything, or carbon tax Carney, this cheat Carney, they try to have these catchy little phrases. This is not a time when that catchy little stuff works. You need to be serious. You need to show that you can take over this negotiation with the United States and do at least as well as people think Carney will. The other thing, though, that works for the Conservatives on their favor is I expect that a person who is an untutored, well, not untutored, but certainly an unprofessional politician is going to have a flub or two. He's going to do something like he did where he said in Kelowna that he would use the federal government's emergency powers to push through an east-west pipeline.
Well, he made it sound like that, but he didn't actually say it. He just made it sound like it.
Okay, but it's going to get analyzed. And then he went to Quebec and he said, no, we'd never do that to Quebec. Well, he's just appointed Stephen Guilbeault as his Quebec lieutenant. Do you actually imagine there's going to be a pipeline that goes across Quebec? There will not be a pipeline. And if this becomes an issue, if we Canadians are looking to have a more a stronger economy internally and with exports to other countries, we're going to need pipelines. If Poilievre can make that an issue and Carney and Guilbeault can be seen to be clashing on that, there are things they can do. But right now, that is not where the trajectory is going.
After that breakfast with Doug Ford, Mark Carney hopped into the SUV and drove to Hamilton for a news conference, a bit of a speech. Sorry, not a news conference because he didn't take questions, but he spoke to steelworkers, said he would have their backs. As he was leaving, media there refused to take questions. They had the RCMP blocking him. Those are the sorts of things that you can't do. He will face more aggressive questioning. And then there's the question of the debates. It was funny after the French language debate. Of course, he's got Ottawa bureaucrat French. He can get by in a meeting. But I was watching CBC's coverage after the French debate, and they said, well, it won't really matter because his French was good enough. And then the French reporters come out, and the first question is, can you handle yourself in a debate with Pierre Poilievre and Yves-François Blanchet? Is he going to be able to handle himself in either English or French against three very professional politicians?
I would say yes, and here's my reasoning for that. Yeah, I mean, let's say we don't know because we haven't seen him, but my suspicion is that all that training that he's had, particularly as the governor of the Bank of England, Bank of Canada, you don't speak off the cuff, you don't say the wrong thing. You are very disciplined in what you're saying. So he's got message discipline. Otherwise, you're playing with markets. And during Brexit, he got absolutely mauled by the tabloids for getting involved. Now, he was called to a parliamentary committee, so he had to answer questions. But in doing so, he made it clear that he didn't think Brexit was a great idea. And then he became public enemy number one, and he got roasted for weeks and months. So he does have experience. I mean, and both of you know the British tabloids are not delicate flowers when it comes to this stuff. So it would really surprise me if he flubbed it in a campaign, that he just couldn't cut it in a campaign. He's been at the highest levels of public life for the last, 15 years? You do learn to think before you speak.
Lorne, what do you think of him in a debate, English or French?
He will have Trudeau's people, who he's inherited as his campaign types, prepping him for all of this. I would never say he's a dumb guy. I think he's a far more extremist person on environmental issues than he lets on, but he has a very calming face in front of, he has a very good mask in front of his environmental issues. Like, for instance, if you look at his work on the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, it is ridiculously environmentalist and lefty.
Well, yeah, I was laughing that he went to Dofasco because he wants to increase the industrial carbon price. That would move production from Hamilton to ArcelorMittal's plants in Detroit and Ohio.
Of course it would. Of course it would. And, you know, this is completely off the topics we're on now, but one of the things I've been wanting to mention for weeks now, since Trump keeps talking about how he stole all their jobs, is under Dalton McGuinty, 200,000 manufacturing jobs moved to the United States because of what he was doing with the Green Energy Act and electricity input costs for manufacturers. You know, this has been happening ever since NAFTA, that our manufacturers have moved elsewhere, not always to the United States, but often to the northern tier states because it was cheaper to work there than it was here. And what Carney is doing is the same thing. So I don't trust Carney to go to the United States and negotiate with Trump because he can't get away from what he's done for the last 10 years full time, which is all of the green initiatives, these net zero initiatives.
Okay, but does any of that matter when we're talking about swing voters?
No, it doesn't matter at all. That's why it animates me so much. That you cannot sit down in Minnedosa, Manitoba, and explain to ordinary, intelligent, interested voters. You can't sit down and in a short period of time explain why Mark Carney is at least as green as Justin Trudeau.
But why I was saying it doesn't matter is if Trump is the issue, then none of those other campaign issues will matter. It will just flood everything out, and that's the only thing people will vote on. For the swing voters, anyway.
His public utterances so far have been very muted in what Lorne's talking about, and I don't disagree with him, with Lorne about what he's just said. But thus far, Carney has, you know, when he won the leadership, he started talking about clean and conventional energy. So, you know, he's keeping in there the idea that we're going to be building pipelines and exporting propane and natural gas, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, when Guilbeault was the environment minister, he wouldn't even support natural gas as a bridge to cleaner energies. He saw natural gas as equally the enemy as heavy oil, which boggles the mind.
And coal. It was all the same to him. I don't think Carney's there, but certainly in his public utterances so far since he won the leadership, he has played down the environmental side, and I think quite rightly, because we're hardly going to be boosting our emissions if we're all driving around in Bennett buggies.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so what's your prediction for when the election gets called, Jen? We'll ask you each that, and then do you have a prediction for the result, or is it far too fluid?
I think you already called it on the dates. It's the 28th or the 5th, I think. I mean, he could go back to Parliament. I think the NDP would eat themselves whole to avoid an election right now because they are
What they've told me is that they would back him for passing EI reform and a package for this, but nothing else. And they swore up and down.
I cannot believe. Would you want to go to an election when you look like you might not even have official party status after it?
They'd back him if he wanted to get rid of the income tax. Trust me, they would back him on damn near anything right now just to keep. Yeah, exactly.
Campaign to kill the Canadian beaver. The NDP would support right now.
Exactly.
Some polls have them at 11%. It's we haven't seen that.
Every Jagmeet Singh saying, "I've always wanted a beaver hat."
Yeah. So he could negotiate with them, but he will not negotiate with them. I can guarantee you.
I don't see it. I don't see Parliament coming back. Lorne?
No, I don't see that. I think you're both right. It's either the 28th of April or the 5th of May. And I don't think that Donald Trump can back away from what he's done fast enough for it to affect the outcome of the election. I think we're going to be very close to a majority for one of the parties or the other. I think it's going to be quite tight. But I do think at the moment, if the momentum, and I don't talk about polls, I'm talking about momentum. If the momentum keeps swinging the way it is, you're going to end up with a Liberal government.
If Donald Trump does what he did for Doug Ford, which is have an explosion of statements about tariffs every couple of days, it could be a massive Liberal majority government, the way things are going.
I mean, let's remember as well that if it's a Conservative minority, that probably ain't going to last very long.
Well, but look at Harper's. Look at Harper's first government. Nobody thought they would find a way to survive, but they survived for over 2 years because Harper and his team were very masterful at carving off each one of the opposition parties to support what they were doing just long enough to move on to the next issue. So who knows?
I was there in 2006, and I had Liberal MPs telling me they'd be back in power in a couple of months. And it was 9 years. So we shall see. It was great fun chatting about this with you, gents. We're going to have plenty of political fodder to write about in the months to come. Thanks so much.
Very good.
Thank you.
Full Comment is a Post Media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. You can subscribe to Full Comment on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Help us out by giving us a rating or leaving a review, and tell your friends all about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.